Hello guys, Panzermeister36 here. Today's video is going to be a post-build review on this kit here, which is Takom. I believe the kit number is 2078. This is the Merkava Mk.1, the initial version of the Merkava. This kit is another excellent example of a kit from Takom. I built one other Takom kit, which is the T29E3. It's very similar to this in how it's designed, so I can kind of see how Takom likes to do things. It's an excellent kit. Not top of the line, but definitely not bottom line either. It's pretty well in the middle. It's got a nice balance between being simple while also having some nice detail. So like I said, kind of like middle ground. This is a post-build review, as I said, which is basically a kit review, but I've actually built the thing so I can tell you how the whole thing fit together, any problems, any errors in the instructions. If I do a kit review of just the plastic in the box, I can just say it looks nice, but this way I can actually tell you how it's a kit it's supposed to build, so I can tell you how it actually builds up. As always, I'm going to start off the video by pointing out any modifications I've done which aren't supplied in the kit or called out in the instructions. So first of all, I removed a section of side skirt here just to make it interesting. So I cut it off and I scratch built a little mount for it there. I added a little bit of wiring for the machine guns, and I also replaced the machine gun here with a trumpeter one. The Takom one is very, very good, and I wouldn't have sought out a replacement, but I already had a trumpeter replacement on hand with some photo etch, so I figured I might as well use it. But it's a little bit better, but the Takom one's also very, very good. I also replaced essentially all the add-on brass, or sorry, not brass, but they're plastic. I've replaced them with copper wire, all the little handles for like the hashes and stuff like that. It's a very simple detailing improvement that I like to do sometimes. I'm trying to get more practice with that kind of stuff. Basically the kit parts there had a little bit of flash and I didn't want to clean it up, so I made my own. They look a little bit better, but again, it's a very, very minor thing. So overall, this kit is mainly, as they say, out of the box. I only did a couple of very, very minor modifications to improve the detail and just kind of show off some of the stuff down there. So as usual, we're going to start with the lower hull and kind of work our way up. This kit has the Lincoln length style track system, where basically all the straight sections are one big molded piece like this from about there to there. There's one piece on the sprue, and then you have a few individual links to do the curves around the wheel there. One more straight section, more individual links there, and then one more straight section on the top. That definitely speeds up the production time, or the building time, because instead of having to build like 130 individual pieces of track per side, you have more like, I don't know, like 30. Definitely speeds up a lot, and on vehicles like this where you have side skirts and you can't see the slack, or if there shouldn't be slack because the tracks are quite tight, this is excellent. It's not really needed to have slack, so it's an excellent way to save time and also make the kit a little more easy to build. The side skirts are molded as one big piece, so I had to slice that section off to show off the nice suspension in there. Pretty cool. The assemblies in there are a little bit complicated, but I mean, Takom did it as well as they could have. It's not like outrageously complicated, just a few parts, but they pop very well together. Cleanup is very minimal, and since you can't see it anyways, it doesn't really matter too much. I got away with not even sanding off the sprue gates on some pieces because I just cut them flush, and they go right up against other pieces, so you can't see it anyways. The outer tire is actually separate from the wheel, so if you want to leave it off for painting, you could do that. I decided not to. And there's actually, like, the back wheel is one piece, and the front wheel I think is 4 pieces. You have the main wheel itself, the rubber section, kind of like the little hubcap here, and then also a second ring that goes inside the tire. And they do that because there's, like, you can see almost like a couple of rings inside the wheel between the hubcap and the actual rubber. You can see a couple of rings in there. They wouldn't have been able to mold those rings otherwise because of how you mold parts. So they had to use a couple of the piece on the inside and the tire is separate to get that detail. But it's very, very easy to clean up on the inner ring inside the tire. I actually managed to not even have to sand off the sprue gates because I just cut it flush and stuck it in there. The sprue gates are inside the tire, so you can't even see them. Very, very easy actually. They did a good job. I also noticed I forgot to clean up a pin mark there. There's a few pin marks on the tracks, but they're very easy to just sand away. So I just missed one there, but the rest you might be able to see I've sand them away all over there. Tracks are very good. On that note of the tracks, they also give you a nice jig, one for each side here. This is used not only for, you can basically just lay the tracks along it if you put the drive wheel and the sprocket, or the idler wheel and the sprocket on here. You can actually just lay the tracks on here and then glue them all together and keep it as one big assembly for painting. But you can also use this to line up the suspension arms, because you basically pop this on, it'll make sure they're all straight, which is excellent. Otherwise the tank might be a little bit wonky. Takom loves to give you jigs. Also on the subject of jigs, the rear idler wheel over here, because of the way that kits are molded, they require that you drill these holes. You can see like lightning holes. There's two there, and so forth. So for each wheel there's, well, I guess on this wheel there's 40, because there's 20 per half, and there's 2 wheels. So they actually want you to drill out those holes. Now I luckily very recently got a pin vise given to me by somebody. That made this a lot easier, because otherwise I would have been using a number 11 knife, or I would have just skipped it altogether. Thank you, Chris, very much for sending me this at the perfect time. It's actually very useful. I've never had one of those before, but I guess perfect timing, because those holes, I mean, it's kind of a pain to drill them, but the way that these parts are molded, that would have been impossible for them to actually mold the holes into the wheel. They do, however, give you a jig. Looks like this. Oops. You can see it has kind of like scallops on the inside. Those line up with these scallops on the wheel there. So basically just slide this on the wheel, it stays on, and then you just drill the holes where they are right there. So I went through all 80 holes in maybe an hour and a half, including cleaning up with a knife all the flash and stuff like that from the drilling process. I thought it was going to be a pain. It actually wasn't that bad. I just played a YouTube video in the background and drilled them out. It was great. So, I mean, if you don't have a drill, you can probably just skip those. They're pretty hard to see, but I guess they're just little lightning hole details that they show in there. I guess I want to go back to the wheels for a second, the main wheels. In the last Takom kit, this was done the same way. When they mold the wheel, pretend this is the rubber tire basically. Generally, kit manufacturers, they mold this in the center of the two halves of the sprue, so you end up with basically a seam line along the entire thing down the middle of the tire, where the two halves of the mold have gone together and left a little bit of a gap. The way that Takom does it is they mold the entire wheel on one side of the mold, and then the other side just flat against it. That way your seam line is technically exactly along one of the edges instead of the middle, and for that reason you can't actually notice the seam line. So instead of having to sand off all 4 sprue gates and the entire seam, you just have to get the 4 sprue gates. There's no seam along the entire rubber tire. That saves a ton of time with all those wheels. And on the T29 there was a lot more wheels than there were on this tank. I guess we're going to move on to the back here. This kit has exactly 2 photo etch parts. One of them is this piece here, which is kind of like a fabric material that covers, oops, sorry, tracks are falling off, but that covers the rear hatch here, which is, in real life, actually in this kit as well, basically it's a way to get in and out of the back of the tank or to store injured personnel. So it's kind of like clamshell doors that open up like this. You can't open them on the kit. There is interior detail for the hatches, but the inside of the tank is no interior detail, so it's, if you had a figure to put in there, it'd look great. I don't, so I've glued it shut, but it's really nice how they give you the option to keep that open. The entire upper hull in this kit basically is one piece that drops on the lower hull. You have to add a few parts, like the stuff on the back, the fuel hatch there, a couple of little lifting points here, the hatch, the periscopes, and the front lights, and this travel guard or travel lock for the gun there. But the entire rest of this thing is one big piece that just basically drops on. Now for that reason there was kind of 4, I'm not sure exactly what they're called, maybe sprue gate or attachment points or part of the molding process. Basically 4 little nubs that were very small raised points that were in these 4 points where you can see blue. Just had to sand down a little bit, and then I've just painted over them with some blue to make sure that I've done it flush, but it was pretty easy. And despite the fact that this was molded as one big massive piece, they have managed to get some exquisite detail in there. So they've got some nice welds on the front here. You can see all these welds They'll look nice with the pin wash on them. There's also a lot of these vents that look great. There's no photo etch for these at all, but again, with a pin wash on that, oops, there goes my light. With a little bit of pin wash on that, that'll look beautiful. There's no one over here, no one over there. It's all really, really good. Takom is really good with their molding. As you saw just a second ago, I actually knocked off the tire, the front light. Sorry, I'm so tired. Front light. Also on the other side as well, they can come off. If you glue them carefully, you can leave them separately. So here we have the two front lights, and basically this is going to make it a whole lot easier to get the lenses detail in there, because I can actually paint the inside with like a nice white or silver color, and then put the clear plastic lenses they give you over top of those. So that makes it a little bit easier to deal with those clear parts. I lost a little piece there, but I'll glue that back on. So that covers basically the entire lower hull. It's pretty straightforward. Like I said, a lot of it was molded as one big piece with no loss of detail at all. One more thing I should point out is you can see I've got a piece of white plastic in there. I put one there, and there's another one kind of about here. There are a lot of vents on this kit. There's a vent here, a little exhaust point there, and a point there. There's also two more exhaust points like this and about there on the other side of the tank. For that reason, if you looked through this vent, you could definitely see those holes shining through the tank. So those plastic cards just serve as basically a view block, so you can't look through the tank and see light out the other side. I'm not really taking any points off for that. But if you're building this kit, you should probably be aware of that. Most of this kit is the turret. It's very complicated. Everybody loves Israeli tanks because they have all these machine guns on them. This tank probably has at least 4 machine guns, including the coaxial gun down there. This one here, I have not stuck it on yet because I want to leave them separate for painting. That'll make it easier to paint them up. This one doesn't really have a solid attachment point. You just glue it onto the little mount here, so I'm leaving it off. The commander's machine gun here has a little peg that it sits on, so it's a little more stable, and you can leave it on. I'll show you a close-up of these. These machine guns are very, very good. Like I said, I replaced the 50 cal over the gun with a trumpeter spare part just because I had it on hand. But they're very, very well molded. And the only thing I had to do to them was drill out the muzzle with a little knife because they were molded solid over. But these are a number of pieces. Not too complicated. This may be like 5 or 6 pieces. But they look great. And they built easily without any wonkiness. That sometimes happens with machine guns like this. Sometimes they end up with a little bit bent or sideways, but this is great. At the beginning of the video I mentioned the wiring I added. Just some basic copper wire there to go from the remote control machine gun to the hatch there, like I saw in some photos. I also put a little more kind of, maybe you can see under the gun itself. Now the main gun actually is not mounted. I'm going to talk about this for a second here. The way the gun is done in the kit, there's actually little kind of like pegs that come off there. And those line up with the holes in between the two halves of the turret. Now, if I left it that way, when I glue the top of and the bottom of the turret together, the gun will be stuck inside. I want it to be separate so I can paint the canvas on the mantlet area here easily. It'd be hard if it was stuck in there. So I've cut those pins off, and I'll glue this in eventually, but right now it's just kind of loose. The gun barrel itself is very nice. You have a couple of pieces here for the canvas, and then the barrel is 2 pieces from about here to there, and then the actual little muzzle at the end here is 1 piece. So it's 2 pieces. You have a top and bottom, but they've made it so that the seam between the 2 halves is exactly aligned with the seam on the thermal sleeve on both sides, so there's no cleanup required. And like I said, the end piece here is 1 piece, so there's no awkward kind of like gap between the parts around the muzzle. Just, very slight seam from the molding process to sand away. This was very, very well done. No need for a replacement barrel because this is very, very nice. So for the rest of the turret, you can see once again we've got some blue from more molding points as there were on the top of the upper hull. A lot of this was molded as one big piece with some more nice welds on it, but there were a number of hinges that you have to put on the sides for these little, I believe they're blowout hatches for the ammunition storage. So there were a lot more details on the upper part of the turret than there were on the hull. But it was still very straightforward to build. You have options for the antennas. I went with all the options because I like all the antennas. But they give you parts so you can have some of these not actually with antennas, just like plugs over them. Also here you can see more handles I replaced. I think there's about 8 that I replaced, but it was very, very easy. The other photo etch piece in the kit is this here. The previous one was on the back of the hull. The mesh there is very, very nice. It pops in easily. A little bit of super glue and nice detail as always. The tow cables were a little bit complicated. Luckily it's that very soft, malleable copper braided wire, so it's very easy to form it. But I would have preferred if they would have molded the eyelets with entire holes that you could kind of stick the wire into. What they actually did was they kind of went with, you might be able to see there, it's kind of like a half hole. So it kind of loops around in like a C shape, but then the bottom of it is just entirely open. So it's not a hole, it's half a hole. So it's not as secure as if it was glued into a hole. Again, it's not perfect, but it still looks pretty good because you can't really see the back because it's against the hull there. At least here you can see that the cable is just kind of sitting against the back of that eyelet. Not great, but not the worst, because I'm going to have to cover this stuff full of or with a tarp or fill it full of stowage anyways, since there are some very awkward pin marks on the inside here that would be impossible to sand away because it's a concave surface with raised detail right next to it. So I'm just going to put some stowage there. On the other side, luckily they give you 2 extra fuel tanks or fuel drums here. Maybe I guess fuel cans would be correct. This one is molded onto the tank like a separate mounted vehicle part, but these are actually separate pieces they give you to put wherever you'd like. So I put them here to cover up those pin marks on that side. The rest of the turret looks great. I want to point out they do have a number of these. They're probably like little tie-down straps. So we got a couple here, and there's some on the sides as well, like near the shovel. You see them there. They're molded as little blobs. They're solid. If you want to go insane, you could replace those with photo etch, but they actually look very, very good. As usual, with a pin wash, they'll look great. With the rest of the level of detail of this kit, that's as good as you need. This kit isn't hyper detailed, but it's still pretty well detailed. And you can see some more weld lines there. Looks pretty good. One more thing I want to point out is that on the underside of the front of the turret here, you can see I've added some welds. That ends up being a gap between the top and bottom of the turret. So you can see the gap is there where the manlet goes. And I've had to kind of continue it where the halves go together. And instead of just filling it, I made it a weld seam because I believe it should be a weld seam. It's very easy with just some styrene rod or stretch sprue that you make some cuts in with a knife and then soften with some Tamiya extra thin cement. I have a video on that. I'll link it up in the top right corner of the video. That's really the only part of the kit that I was kind of like annoyed with, because they really should have molded this better, or at least in a way where you wouldn't have a huge, like it was a pretty big gap, at least a millimeter wide, so I really had to fill it with that weld seam. One thing I do want to point out as a nice pro in this kit is that the ball and chain armor has been very well done, because it's only 3 pieces. This entire section here is molded as that side of the turret bin. This whole back section is molded as part of that side of the turret bin, and these are all molded as this side of the turret bin. On some kits these are individual pieces. That's insane. I've seen guys replace these with brass chains and stuff. That's also way too insane. Like I was saying previously, with the level of detail of the rest of this kit, this is as good as you need to make everything look like it's on the same level of detail. I guess I should point out that in real life this turret is cast, and there's no cast texture on it at all. At least some parts of it are cast, like these sides. It's really not that much cast texture in real life, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. I'm not going to add anything to it. I like it as is. People might also point out that Merkavas have anti-slip texture. That is true, but the Merkava Mk.1, which this is, did not. The Mk.1 Hybrid, Mk.2, Mk.3, Mk.4, and I believe Mk.5 now all have anti-slip on them, but this one does not need it. I believe Takom's like Mk.1 Hybrid and other kits don't actually have anti-slip in the kit. That's why I chose the Mk.1 and not the Mk.1 Hybrid, because I did not want to add anti-slip to it. I also want to briefly point out, like I was talking about earlier, all the hatches on this kit can be opened, and they have nice interior detail for the hatches. So that's this hatch here for the loader or the commander. There's also one here for the other guy, the driver's hatch as well. They're all the same. They have nice interior detail, but there's no actual breach or anything inside the tank. So if you have a figure to block the hatch off and stick out, it looks great. But you don't want to leave these open because you can just see inside like that. They also have lots of clear parts for the periscopes, and there's also a clear part that I'm going to paint later and put in there for the main sight there. So that's about it for this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Like I was saying, this kit is nicely detailed as like an intermediate level kit, not insanely detailed and not tons of photo etch everywhere, but it's definitely not a beginner kit. It's a little bit more complicated with some of the finer assemblies for the guns and smaller parts in the turret. The level of detail with the welds and molded on stuff is very, very good. Only thing I really had to add was those weld seams around the front underside of the turret, and the more complicated parts like the tracks and the drilling holes on the other wheels were very nicely supported by the kit supplied jigs, like this one and the ones for the tracks. They give you 2 of these. So Takom once again is giving us a lovely kit. I enjoyed building this one a lot as a nice breather between some more serious detailed kits. It's very, very nice. And if you guys want to build a Merkava, this is probably a good option for you. I know there's other manufacturers that make those, but I don't know if anybody else makes a Mk.1 as well as this. I know there's some older, like Tamiya Academy kits from probably about the 80s when this tank came out. Those kits are probably not as good as this one. This one's very, very nice. And I had a lot of fun building it, so hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments about this tank, this kit, or anything like that, you can post them in the comments below. I always read through them all. And I will be building this, I'll be featuring this in a painting and weathering tutorial very soon, where I'll be using a bunch of MIG ammo products, painting and weathering IDF armor, I guess. So, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you look forward to my next ones. And as always, thanks for watching. Huge thanks to the Patreon and PayPal supporters who give me a little bit of money every month, which helps me buying tanks and kits like this for you guys to see in videos. As always, happy modeling. I will see you next time, and goodbye.